connect more with God. And so just different spiritual practices that we are trying to implement into our lives to make our lives better, to make the lives of those around us better, to connect more with God. And so today, on this final week of our series, we are going to be talking about the spiritual practice of generosity. So I have asked these two to come on today so we can have a conversation about what generosity means to us, the ways in which we have experienced it, the ways in which we would like to see the church do a better job of it, and kind of the benefits that we can see both for ourselves and for the world. And so we're just gonna have a conversation today and go through some questions and just kind of see where it takes us. So thank you guys so much for being on today. Maybe we can start off with just each of you taking a few seconds to introduce yourself, maybe tell a little bit about who you are, and yeah.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, my name's Jonathan. I'm actually the most generous person in the world, so this just really works out for now.
So it's perfect.
That's not true at all whatsoever. I'm sorry. My name is Jonathan Norfie. I've been with Icon. I've been there since the beginning, since actually Zoom calls like this in the beginning, before we had ever had a building or really even a community, before we were even down here in Texas. So I love Icon. I love the mission. I love what we're about. My wife, my two kids, Austin and Carter, we live here in San Marcos. And yeah, like I said, we're happy to be here.
Very cool. Well, my name is Kim Meneses, and I live in Lockhart, but I lived in Kyle when I first went to Icon, when they were back in Old Town Kyle. And we kind of made some rounds and we're back again. So I'm really excited to be a part of this series and hope that we can impart some wisdom and gain some wisdom back from people and their feedback.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I was telling Kim before we started the recording that, and I've said this before, but these conversations have become my favorite thing that we've been doing, just because it's so good to get to hear just a wide variety of different voices and perspectives. And it's just been really helpful. And the feedback that we've gotten as well from people has just been really, really great. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity. And I think that I am confident that you guys will have some words of wisdom to impart to everyone today. No pressure. No pressure. Just make sure that you're following the Spirit, but no pressure. So we'll just start off. We're just going to go through some questions and you guys can give your responses. We'll kind of talk some things through and see where it takes us. So for the first question, generosity is this term that we hear a lot in church and we talk a lot about. So for each of you individually, when you think of generosity, what does it mean to you to live a generous life?
I think generosity is more than just, a financial giving. I think it's just generosity is giving of yourself, giving of your talents. It sounds kind of religious now, but your talents and your gifts, but just also being compassionate, encompassing that, without compassion, generosity is just an act, I guess. And I think it's just all around giving of yourselves, your heart, your mind. I'm kind of rambling now, but I don't think we can limit generosity to just one little thing. It's just this whole great big picture of giving of ourselves, just as Christ did. So
yeah. I like that. I love that picture of it's just us being willing to give of ourselves. That's really beautiful.
Yeah. I think for me, generosity, whenever I think about generosity, I think naturally, whenever I look at my resources, and Kim, like what you mentioned, whether that be your time or your finances or your energy, I think the natural thing for me to do, for all of us to do, is just to go, okay, what can I do with this? What can I do with what I have? And how can this help me? And I think whenever I think about generosity, I think that it frames up kind of that first part, that natural tendency, well, what can I do? I think generosity means to consider those people around you, or considering the people in your circle, and going, how can my resources fit into into their lives. You know what I mean? It's not just about me, and it's not just about what I have, but how can my resources fit into their lives? And I think that's where generosity starts. And I think that that's just the baseline for me of what generosity means.
Yeah, that's really good. Where it's just kind of living our life in such a way that we understand that, if we really believe that we all belong to each other, and if we really believe that we are all made in the image of God, and that we are all, these fully human people that are trying to live life, like if we really believe that, then I think there is something to be said for looking at our resources, no matter what those are, whether that's financial or our time or our compassion, whatever it is that we have to offer, looking at it as it's not just for us to consume ourselves, but that it's
Right.
be shared for the benefit of all. Yeah, I think that's really, really beautiful. So why do you think generosity matters? Why do you think that, we talk a lot about, we see scriptures about generosity, and we talk about giving and being generous in the context of the church. Why do you think that matters for us, particularly as Christ followers? Let's kind of add that little caveat in there of why do you think as Christ followers, generosity matters?
Do you want to go first? You want me-
Go ahead, Kim.
I don't want to talk like
You in a rock, paper, scissors.
No, it's all you, Kim.
I
I'm
will
just sitting
always
back.
rock, paper, scissors. Well, as followers of Christ, that is his trait. God sent his only son down to earth to bring salvation. So that's just the nature of God. I couldn't imagine giving up my son, but he did that. So that's just his trait, his character trait. So it's very important for us who say that we are followers of Christ to be able to show that, like I said, I wouldn't give up my son, I hope, but just
yeah.
to be generous and to think about others, as we talked about before. God thought about every single one of us, and
Yeah.
We need to be mindful of other people and their needs, and how we can, I don't want to say just be generous, but maybe minister in a way to serve them, not to really just bully them with Bible or anything like that, but just to serve them in the love of Christ.
Yeah.
I think that is the biggest example that we will ever give in our walk is, how are we serving others in that?
Yeah, I love that.
That's my opinion.
No, I think that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Jonathan, what about you?
Yeah, I think generosity matters, and I think there's a lot of different reasons why it matters. I think that it's obviously anytime you have anything good, there's going to be reasons why why something's considered good, why they matter. I think if I'm thinking about generosity and why it matters, I feel like it's just, again, kind of it's a really, really tangible way of feeling hope. And I think there's a lot of different scenarios and a lot of different situations where you can maybe see hope, you know what I mean? Or where maybe you have experienced hope in the past. But I think the thing about generosity, for at least for the people who are receiving the generosity, is it's a very tangible way to feel hope. And I think that's so important to feel it, and not just to see it in other people's lives and all that kind of stuff, but I just thinking back to times where people have blessed me or people have been generous to me, it just feels good. And that's kind of something, it's sort of an anchor that you can hold on to, and it can sort of give you maybe your next breath, your next step, whatever may be moving in. So I think it matters because it's just such a tangible way of encouraging and lifting and providing, and like what you said, Kelly, if we're all one group of people, it's such a cool way for us to just pass hope around, I guess, to one another.
That I've never heard it put that way before. And I just think that's, like, it's like this tangible way for people to feel hope and to experience hope when they're seeing someone else as being, because when you are in need or you're suffering, or because we've all been in moments where we've been in a position where we're able to to be generous to others. And we've all been in a position where we've depended upon and relied on the generosity of others. You know, it's always this kind of giving and receiving, is ebb and flow of where we're at in any season of our life. And it is like when someone is generous to you, whether that be you have a physical need and they financially give to you, or whether it's them just using their time to serve you and to be with you, you feel seen. You feel like they see where you are and they're willing to step in and come alongside you and give of themselves to you. And it does, like inspires hope inside of us to say, oh, this, like, that is like the goodness of humanity on full display.
Yes,
We're
yes.
generous with each other, you know, that I love that so much, that it's just, you can feel that it's a tangible expression of hope. I think that's so
cool.
I love that.
I love the way you called it, passing hope. We're just passing hope around.
Yeah.
You know, that's awesome. You know, we can encourage people with our words, and you know, and we can say we're going to pray for you if they're in a bad situation, but to walk alongside them, wow, that speaks volume. And that sometimes when you're in the thick of it, you know, and you hear somebody say, oh, just have hope, and you're kind of like, you're not in this. But when you come and say, hey, I'm going to walk with you, I'm going to pray with you, I'm going to be there with you, that's hope in action, you know. It's like hope that you were talking about. I love that. I love that.
And you know, we are like, I think it's, you know, in particular, I mean, I don't know, we just, you know, our finances and our time, those are like two things that I think most people hold really precious to them. And so I think when people are willing to give of that to us, like that just, it's both humbling and it connects us, you know, on just a really deep level. And I love that so much. That's such a beautiful sentiment. So I don't know. I mean, I know a little bit about both of your stories and kind of how, the ways in which you grew up in faith and the churches you were a part of and that sort of thing. I think for any of us that have been around church for a while or have, you know, kind of grown up in faith, I think that we could probably all agree that there are a lot of people who, when it comes to giving financially, to a church, like we obviously generosity encompasses way more than just finances, but a part of that is giving of our finances in whatever way, you know, whether it's through charity or to a church or whatever. And I think oftentimes people have a complicated relationship when it comes to giving and the church, for a myriad of reasons. And so I think there could be people watching today that maybe when they hear that we're talking about generosity and giving, that could cause them to instantly kind of bristle because maybe of things they've heard in the past. You know, I think in my experience, there's a lot of people I know who think that all churches care about is your money. And sometimes that's very valid because it can very much, I think there are some churches where that is the case and it can very much feel that way. So why do you think, and maybe in your personal experience, why do you think that people have such a complicated relationship with this? What do you think are some of the contributing factors that would cause someone to bristle when they hear, oh man, they're talking about giving, they're talking about generosity or money in the church?
I think just at the base of it too, there's already a complication with a complicated relationship with giving just in general. I mean, again, it goes against our primal instincts, our survival instincts. You know what I mean? We have our resources and we want to keep those and we got to use those so that we benefit from them. And so I think there's just a complicated relationship in general. And then you accompany that with situations where you have maybe seen some of those things abused in the church. And that wasn't, I don't think for me personally growing up, I didn't see a lot of that like personally. But you do see that. I mean, there's stuff that, it gets blown up in the media, and you see different situations and circumstances where maybe churches weren't, or at least it didn't seem like they were being the best stewards of the resources that they had been given. And so again, I think it's already complicated in general. And then you put that on top of a layer of maybe some people that have abused that position of power, or that position of power is what it is. That position of, that's what money equals in the situation of power. And so I totally understand and completely get where people are coming from whenever they approach this situation of giving towards a church with a little bit of hesitancy. I totally get, totally get that, totally understand that. And so that's something I feel like that's going to be one of the hardest things. I know for me personally, like whenever you're kind of in this place where you're deciding what steps you're taking and moving forward and progressing and all this kind of stuff and changing, I feel like anytime we're dealing with our finances, or anytime we're dealing with giving up something of ourselves, that's gonna be one of the last things to kind of fall in line with where maybe we feel like we need to be at. So, or at least one of the hardest things to hold on to. So.
Yeah, that's really true.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was kind of thinking, just kind of seeing, and sadly it's not all churches, but kind of like the ones that have had scandals are the ones that get the most noise.
Right.
And I think that's part of it. People kind of feel like, not all people, but in my experience in the church, being in the church a long time, that people kind of feel like, well, they've got this building, they've got everything running that they need, why do they need my money?
Yep.
Or just seeing some, I'll share this with you, like some people in poverty, where a church looks like it's thriving and in abundance. So I think that would kind of set people off too. Like if there's people that are really hurting and nothing's being done to help them, that would definitely put somebody on guard. Like, I'd rather just give my money to that person who really needs it. I think there's a lot of opinions, a lot of reasons that maybe they've related to something that happened in the church before.
Yeah.
Sadly.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, people in poverty, and people too that are observing and might see, okay, this church is like, they have all these programs and they're doing all these things, and yet there's like people that have these big felt needs that are living in their communities, and it feels very it just rubs you the wrong way, and you will hear, I think too, I grew up, the main church that I was in growing up, like through middle school and high school especially, the prosperity gospel message was huge. And for those of you who are not familiar with that, it's like this whole idea of like that basically that God's ultimate desire for all of us is to be wealthy. Like that's God's plan, is that we are all supposed to be wealthy, which that breaks down really quick. Like when you start looking around the world and going, okay, but then what, like that, it doesn't add up with what we see in the world. But it was like, I would sit in services where the pastor or the evangelist or whoever was up speaking would be talking about money and would tell us like, take your offering envelope. And it was called this name it, claim it theology, where it was like, write on your offering envelope what you want God to give back to you because you gave money to the church. So if you want a new car, write that on the offering envelope. If you like, and it was even stuff, not even just material things, but like, if you want to get into this college, you write that on your, like, and so it was just such this twisted view of like, it reduced generosity to, if I give this money to God, which, can we just be honest about that for a minute? Like when we're giving money to a church, we're giving it to the church. Like, I'm not saying that God, like, obviously we want to be a part of church communities where we truly believe the leadership of that church is being good stewards and that they're using those resources to do the work of the kingdom. Like that's the point. But we place all this emphasis on like, you're giving to God. So like people feel like it just, the pressure that puts on you and the unhealthy relationship that instills in us when it comes to giving to a church is just astounding. And I struggled for years. Like that was such,
Yeah.
I've always felt that it was important to give to a church, but I think honestly the reason why for so long I did was because I felt like if I didn't, I was in sin and that God was going to be mad at me if I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, I mean, it's just, there's so much to unpack there, you know, when it comes
Yeah.
to the ways in which the church has abused that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you
I think,
I was going to say, you know, that also kind of brings a different point of like, even someone who gives faithfully and they're still in a place of need, you know, that's a lot of guilt too. Like
Yep.
maybe I'm not serving God the way I should be. Maybe
Yeah.
I'm gonna think, God, why aren't you blessing me?
Mm.
So that kind of came to mind when you were talking about, because I've seen that to where people are like, maybe I'm not doing enough for God.
Yeah.
And then there's a guilt and a condemnation that's like, whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah.
So just my 2 cents on that part, but yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Or people will be in a financial position where quite honestly, they don't have the money to be able to give to the church, but yet
Exactly.
they feel like they need to either go into debt or do without their basic needs because I have to give this money to the church. And it's like, there's just something really off about that to me.
Yeah.
You know, to make people feel, you know, we talk about the tithe a lot, which I don't want to get into that fully because that's like a whole nother, you know, sermon in and of itself, you know, but like we like to say, like, we like to use that as we like to tell people that like that's a commandment, like if you don't do that you're in sin, and that's actually not true. Which, you know, and you know, I think a lot of times we use that as a means to, because we need to be honest, if it weren't for people giving to Icon wouldn't be able to continue. Like that's how churches work. Like we have to be honest about that. And so clearly, like that's how churches flourish and thrive, is when the people that are part of the community share resources for that community to continue. But at the same time, I think what happens is I've done it before, and I've seen other pastors where it's like, you are so afraid of what would happen if you don't kind of like make people feel like they have to give. You're afraid of what will happen to your position, to, you know, all of that. And so it's kind of become this really, we are putting things on the text that's not actually there. Like there's nowhere in the text where God says, I am commanding you, you have to do this or you are in sin. Like if we look all throughout the New Testament, every time it talks about giving, we see things like no one should give out of compulsion, but people should give what they feel in their heart they should give. God loves a cheerful giver. Like it's supposed to be, we get to give consent to that. Like we don't have to feel like we don't have a choice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like we get to make that choice. So yeah, I mean, again, I'm starting to go really long right now on this, but you know, I just want people watching today to know, like, there are just times when if you are financially in a really rough spot, I don't know that you feeling like you're failing God because you can't give it all or you can't give what you normally give. I just
so good.
I don't want people to carry that shame and carry that.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Oh, all right. So let's since we're kind of talking about scripture a little bit right now, maybe could you share an example about generosity from the scriptures that has been meaningful for you? Maybe something that when you think about generosity in your own life, maybe it's a scripture that you kind of go back to over and over again that encourages you to live your life with generosity. Could you each share that with us?
Sure. It's always odd on who's going first. I will share. I'm up. My husband told me last night, he's like, just whatever the first thing comes to your mind. And so the first thing that came to my mind was, and I am not a Bible scholar, so please don't think.
Me neither. It's cool.
No, I have
Join the club.
read it again. What? Okay. It was in First Kings, when the Lord told Elijah to go to the widow in Zarephath. And just to kind of short paraphrase, he was instructed to go to Zarephath, and he said, I have a widow there who's going to take care of you. So the widow had a son. So they meet up, and he tells her to bring her a drink of water. Okay, bring me a drink of water. And then he's like, well, while you're at it, bring me some bread, which seems like a simple request, but the widow was like in desperation. She was in a hopeless situation to where she was there. She said, I have just a little bit of flour and a little bit of oil. And here I am gathering a few twigs to try to make a fire to make our last meal. And so, imagine, okay, this is the last meal I'm going to have, and then I'm going to die because I have nothing else.
Wow.
And then Elijah tells her, okay, well, go ahead and do what you're going to do, but bake me some bread first. I can imagine through her mind, like, I just told you, this is all I got. But she obviously had already heard from the Lord, because he told Elijah he had sent a woman to take care of him. So she baked the bread, and then he says, and bake some for you and your son. And then says that you will always have oil and flour for your home, that you will not go hungry. So the story goes on to where she basically survived. And it seems kind of weird. It's like, well, there's not really a generosity tone there, but there kind of is, because she was in a desperate time to where she could have easily said, sorry, dude, this is mine, and I'm keeping it for me and my son. My son's going to go hungry. But she followed her obedience, what God told her, take care of him. So she took care of him. And by taking care of him, by being generous in the little that she had, she in herself was blessed with, I don't want to cry, was blessed with abundance and provision from God. Yeah. So that's the first scripture that came to my mind. And I thought, wow, God, sometimes we are in a desperate state where we're just like, I don't have anything else to give. But, I'm going to share this with my neighbor, or I'm going to share this with a stranger down the street who I know is hungry. Yeah. And it's just miraculous to see how God provides.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's more stories. So if you want to keep going and read First Kings, what was that, chapter 17? Read the rest, because it's really, really good how the things that happen later on in life. So.
Yeah. I love how you use the word abundance too. Like, I think that just reminded me how often we can have these mindsets of scarcity, that, like, especially if we come from a place where we have struggled to have what we've needed, it's really easy to think that there's not enough to go around,
Yeah.
But when in reality, like, if everyone is living generously, if everyone is offering, even those of us in moments like this widow where you feel like, oh, I don't have much to offer. I think when we're all living in generosity, it's that whole, like, sometimes we need to be on the receiving end and sometimes we're able to be on the giving end, but it's this kind of beautiful dance, that we get to all participate in. Yeah, I love that. It's really beautiful. Okay, so Jonathan, how about you? How about an example from scripture that has been helpful for you?
Yeah, we had talked a little bit earlier about why generosity matters, and I think I mentioned kind of it matters for maybe the side that's being generous or getting the generosity given to them. And I think Kim, the same along the same lines of you. Kind of the first scripture that popped in my head, of the first story, was in King David. And I remember hearing the story. Actually, I remember Dan talking about this back at a program that we were part of. Gosh, over 10 years ago, honestly. And it was, I won't bore you with all the details, but basically, King David, he had essentially acquired a lot of I don't know what the word, loot from a kingdom that they kind of took over, and in the middle of that, he was gonna kind of offer sacrifices to God, and there were some extra things given to him, maybe that they didn't necessarily acquire in the battle, but some other things that were given to them. And one of the things that he said was he wasn't going to sacrifice those things, and he said, "I will not offer to my God that which cost me nothing." Now, one of the things I think that's really good about generosity is, I think that, again, what's a good thing about generosity is when we're giving to people, essentially what we're doing is we're aligning our heart with God. And I don't think that every time that you're generous and every time that you have to give, it has to like hurt you. Like, I don't think that that's
Right.
I don't think that it, like, generosity doesn't mean that you're, that it's costing you everything. You know what I mean? I don't think that, but I also think too that I think the point, and one of the awesome things about generosity, is it aligns your heart, and it produces more selflessness inside of you, and it makes you more aware of those around you and the people that you want something. And I think those things, when it does cost you something, that's kind of pushing you towards what I believe is the heart of God. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And again, not in like this sick, twisted way of like this way that you're like this almost like condemning type of way, but in a way, again, that offers hope. Like, I'm becoming more like this person that Christ has said this is the best way to live.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think that was the first story that popped in my head. And again, that was something that
Don't
that
mind.
was something. You're good. Again, that was kind of the first thing that popped in my head, and that was something that I heard a long time ago. And yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking of.
Yeah, no, that's really, really good. I really love that. Okay, so we've talked about already about how sometimes we're on the receiving end and sometimes we're on the giving end, when it comes to generosity. Can you each tell us about a time in your life when you have been impacted by somebody else's generosity?
I'll go first this time, Kim. Because the person in my story's name is Kim, actually, and Dino, who are my parents. It was something.
It's a good name.
It's an awesome name. Yeah, it's a beautiful name. So whenever my wife and I, when we were in Colorado, and then we moved back down here to San Marcos to again jump in with Icon, and we were pregnant with our first child with Austin, and Christina she was like 8 months pregnant, and we got moved into our new place, and my mom and dad, they bought us a washer and dryer as a newborn gift, basically. And so, and at the time, like that's not like this, I don't know, that's not like the super sexy gift, you know what I mean? It's like a washer and dryer, you know what I mean? Especially like when you're in your 20s, you're kind of, but we were so appreciative of it, because it was a thoughtful gift. It was a very practical gift. And we've got that same washer and dryer in our living room right now, 7-8 years later, right?
Wow.
And so I think, again, simple, practical. I would say every other week, I always tell Christina, like, that's like going in there and looking at that reminds me of my parents. And that's not something that they had to do, but it was just something, it was awesome. It was awesome. And it was something that I think about even to this day. Every time we use it, it was very simple. It was very practical. And it was such a blessing in the middle of kind of what we were getting into with newborns and all that kind of stuff. So Thank you, Mom and Dad.
Yep. Man, a washer and dryer is that is a good gift.
It's a very good gift. It's an awesome gift.
No, that's
and again,
awesome.
Being someone who had never owned a washer and dryer up until that point, I didn't realize, but that gift has grown on us so much. So yes, it was an awesome gift.
That's awesome. Kim, how about you?
Especially with the newborn. I mean, that's
seriously.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that thing got so much use. Yeah, still does.
Boy, I think, what you mentioned earlier, Kelly, there's an ebb and flow where you're giving and receiving and giving and receiving. I think the most impactful time was in 2014. you guys know my son was diagnosed with MS, and then in 2014, and then later that year, our daughter was diagnosed with MS. So in that time when Nate was diagnosed, we were just in financial crisis like never before. You know, you've gone through tough times, and then I think everybody probably has gone through a tough time, maybe it's just us. But then that was like the pivotal time of, this is the greatest time of need we have ever been in. And we were going, his specialist was in Houston. We were going back and forth to Houston. It seems like every week we were in Houston. We're like, let's just move to Houston. It's going to be better. But, you know, gas, food, utilities, everything. We were at a point to where like one day everything was going to come crashing down. And so that year, I have a list. I kept a list of everybody who blessed us that year, because I go through and I pray for them, and I just thank God over and over, because that year, you know, somebody could fill up our gas tank, took us to breakfast. Icon blessed us at Christmas time, and that was totally a surprise. I had no idea that was coming, but different things that people did that helped to sustain us, helped to sustain us that year. And if you ever want to know if God will provide when you're in a tough spot, he will, because of the generosity of others. And I think sometimes we compare our generosity like, oh, well, it's only $20 or, you know, whatever. Or I can't do much here. Well, everything, I will tell you, every cent will add up when somebody is in need. Don't ever feel like your gift is not big enough or whatever. It will add up. So, you know, that was whenever I saw your question, I was like, of course, it's that time, because that was when God said, I got you. And I can't say it's been easy and smooth sailing all the time, but that's when, for me, spiritually, I knew, okay, God said he's going to do it. He's going to do it. And he's going to do it over and over and over again. And even, you know, like the song says, even when I don't see it, you're working, you know, God, when it's hard, man, you just, God, I don't know where it's coming from, but you do. And, so thankfully we are still here to tell the story. 2014, you know, that whole year, and 2015, it was just chaos. And you know, God came through with so many blessings from so many different people that we did not expect. So that's my story.
That's so awesome.
Seriously. I mean, it's like what Jonathan said in the beginning, that is like tangible hope, you know, when people stepped in and saw you and met those needs, it's tangible hope. That's just so incredibly beautiful. Thank you guys both for sharing those stories. Thank you so much for everything you shared. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up. But yeah, just thank you guys for speaking into this topic and for your wisdom and for sharing your lived experiences with us. I just really, really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Well, welcome back. Thank you all so much for your patience with our technical difficulties. Oh, the joys of technology. And can I just say, if Dan wasn't here, then we just wouldn't have had church this morning, because there's no way. Yes, major applause for Dan and his technology saving capabilities. So, you know, I loved that conversation so much, and I loved the insights and the wisdom and the lived experiences that Kim and Jonathan shared with us. You know, it was so impactful for me, and it was just so beautiful to get to hear the different perspectives and ways in which we can, you know, make generosity a priority and how it really does matter. And I just have a few ending thoughts that I want to share with you before we end this morning. I just want to remind all of us that, you know, during this series about Lent, it's been about these spiritual practices. And in the same way that Prayer and fasting are the other two practices that we've talked about, and really every spiritual practice. Giving and generosity is just like those practices. Giving and generosity is meant to be an invitation. It's an invitation for us to participate in building a world that is just, and building a world that is loving and good. And it gives us this chance to partner with God in what God is doing in our midst. And I mentioned in the conversation, we can sometimes look at giving and tithing in particular. It can easily become something that crosses over to this side of legalism, to something that we do it because we feel like we have to, or because we're afraid of what will happen to us if we don't, rather than something that flows from our heart. Tithing, it isn't meant to be this practice that we feel held hostage by. The practice of giving and generosity isn't meant to bring guilt and shame upon us. Is tithing a good thing? Absolutely. Is giving and generosity a good thing? Well, clearly, yes, it is. I mean, Jesus himself said, that it's good to tithe, and it's a practice that shouldn't be neglected. But what we don't see is Jesus commanding every person to tithe and then heaping condemnation upon people if they aren't able to. Jesus always spoke to the heart of the matter when it comes to all the ways in which we practice our faith. Dan shared a verse in the chat, and I'm going to share it again with you, but this is where Jesus is talking about tithing. It's in Matthew 23:23, and he says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint, dill, and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faith. It is these you ought to have practiced without neglecting the others." So we see here that one can participate in tithing, one can participate in generosity and in giving, and yet still have a heart that is far from caring about the things of the kingdom, like justice, mercy, and faith. And also on the flip side, if we are hesitant to give, if we are hesitant to make tithing a practice, or to make generosity a spiritual practice in our life, if that's hard for us, we have to ask ourselves why and interrogate the heart behind it. It's about, looking at the motivation that we hold. And if we're scared to give, or we're hesitant to be generous, we need to look at that and ask ourselves why that could be. Why are we holding so tightly to material possessions? Why are we holding so tightly to our resources and to our finances, and allow the Spirit to speak to us and lead us in those things? And, I gotta say, and we talked about this a little bit, but, I am weary of seeing tithing and giving used by faith leaders as a means to control people or to guilt people into giving their money to the church. And I also think that giving and generosity are important practices for us as followers of Jesus. And I believe that we can approach this in a healthy way that both rejects any way in which guilt and shame is tied to the practice of giving, and at the same time embrace the fact that generosity and giving and tithing are really beautiful and important practices that will lead us into living more like Jesus in our world. So, I've loved today. I've loved this conversation. And I think to just kind of leave all of us with maybe this week, just spend some time, just kind of offering an open heart to the Spirit and asking the Spirit to lead you in what ways might the Spirit be leading us into a greater life of generosity. In what ways is the Spirit inviting us into that practice in order to build a more just and good and loving world around us? So, and also, again, thank you so much for engaging in the chat. There's just been so many incredible scriptures and comments and insight. And, I was talking to Jenny Wisty this week. We were having a conversation about that and about how that is something with virtual church that has been so life-giving, is the ability for people to give feedback and to share their thoughts and to share their wisdom and the things that they're learning. And it's just been so beautiful and life-giving for all of us. So Dan is going to put a link in the chat, but Pastor Sabrina, one of our very own pastors here at Icon, she actually this week wrote a really beautiful piece for the newspaper in Lockhart about Lent. And so we're going to include that in the chat so that you all can read it. It was just really, really beautiful, and just wanted to share that with all of you because we're wrapping up our Lent series today. And so I really hope that through these past several weeks that we all have been brought to a place where we are able to really start practicing some things or continue practicing some things that just invite the Spirit in to lead us, which is what the Spirit does. The Spirit's always leading, as long as if we're willing to listen, the Spirit is leading. So it was so great to be with all of you today. I hope you all have an incredible week, and we will see you right back here next Sunday.
Stream died and it went back to the old just now because it hit 10:40. The time wasn't adjusted.
It wasn't?